Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining our weekly customer success digital meetup. I'm Marina Trompe, customer success lead of Qualibrate. And in our digital meeting room today, we have Alan, the director of Qualibrate, and Martina, head of marketing. Before we start, I would like to express our wish that everyone is still going well and staying healthy and strong. I can see a few new people today on the call. So just to give you a bit of an overview of what are those sessions about. On our side, we try to keep engaged, and we feel that we need to keep engaged with you, our customers, on all digital channels as much as possible. This is why we came up with this idea of this digital meetups series, which we are hosting for all of our customers. The main objective is actually to give an update on the new features of Qualibrate, show live demonstrations of advanced functionalities and interesting use cases, which can be easily implemented in Qualibrate 3.0. And today's session is dedicated to a very interesting topic, actually. Today, we will be looking into advanced variables. This is, by the way, new functionality which is available in Qualibrate 3.0. So we will see how you can use it and how easy it's to implement it. Alan will take a lead today, and he will guide you through an advanced functionality. A quick technical note, like always, you are all on mute. In case you would like to ask a question, you can always type it in Q&A section. There is a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. This you can do at any time. We will try to answer it during the session and within the 20 minutes session afterwards. We also want to make it interactive, this session. So you can always raise your hand if you have any questions or feedback during the breaks, which Alan will make, or of course, during the last 20 minutes of Q&A part. To raise your hand, please use the button below. We will unmute you and you will be able to address your question live. And now, Alan will show you the magic of Qualibrate advanced features. So Alan, please, stage is yours.
Thank you, Marina. And thank you everyone for attending today's meetup session. So I hope you guys can see my screen and you can hear me. So Marina, I guess that's the case.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So before I jump into the actual session itself, Marina already mentioned it, but we are trying to engage with customers as much as we can, especially in these nowadays, given the situation with the coronavirus. We want to reach out to all of you to make sure that we keep engaged with you and we keep you engaged into the platform so you can deliver value into your specific projects. And the purpose is really of the sessions is, of course, to connect not only from our customers to ourselves, but perhaps other users might have questions that you might not have think of. And I think it's a good opportunity to raise those questions and hit out the other challenges that people are facing. We want to use this platform also for those users to learn some of the things that we have published in the product and all the features that our team is tirelessly working on in a daily basis and functionalities that we're rolling out quite quickly into production. We want to make sure that we provide that platform so you can learn how we are designing those features so you can resolve those specific challenges. And last but not least, we have Marina and myself, which to the best of our ability, we're going to try to resolve any other type of questions or maybe some troubles that you're facing or some issues that you're facing while doing certain tasks within Qualibrate. So we want to give you that 20-minute slot towards the end of the session so you have the opportunity to raise some of those issues. And we want to be transparent. And if there is an issue that is blocking you and it's blocking other customers, we want to give you full transparency and see how we can resolve that issue as fast as possible so we can remove you out of the blocking point. As Marina was mentioning, this is a series of meetings that we are proposing. We started the first meeting 3 weeks ago, and the first meeting of the series was really focused on introducing Qualibrate 3.0. I mentioned during that session that some of our customers, because we're inviting all of our customers around the world, and some of those customers are still in the previous version of Qualibrate. We are in the process of, in iterations, migrating the users from version 2 into the version 3. Some of you might be already there, but for the ones that are not, it made sense to make an introduction to the platform from a general perspective, because we did a lot of improvements across the board compared to the previous version. So I think it makes sense to kind of give a little bit of a sneak peek of what's coming eventually towards their installations and their accounts. It's important to mention that all of 100% of our users are going to be upgraded to 3.0. First, the cloud customers are the ones that are being migrated as we speak. We have migrated already some of them. And eventually, the on-premise customers will follow a slightly different, let's say, migration schedule. But we are planning to have that migration happen as soon as possible in your specific installation. On the second session, we went more into the specific features. And what we're trying to do here is that we want to have a dedicated session for specific topics. So in the last session, what we did is that we covered some more details about how do we manage test data, how do we manage data sets, and we also went into details about how do we add looping and repetition to your specific test cases, because this is actually quite a useful feature for you if you want to do mass or volume-based type of testing objectives. Today's session is going to be focused on another topic that requires a bit of a session in itself, because there's a lot of functionality in there. We try to simplify the experience as much as we can, but at the same time, we also want to give you features that can help you cover those really challenging cases from a testing perspective. And the advanced variables will give us an ability to add an extra dimension to your tests to handle certain dynamic behaviors, especially when it comes to your applications under test. And very useful from an automated testing perspective. But actually, this morning, we trained some users in the UK that were planning to use Qualibrate as a manual testing capability. And even the advanced variables can be very useful for them as well. So today we're really going to focus on that. And before I jump into that, I would like to do a bit of a recap of what we covered last session, right? So like I mentioned, in case you were not able to attend the previous session, what we did is that we went into deep in all the functionalities that we offer on managing test data. As you guys know, Qualibrate, you have the ability to record flows, which basically takes care of recording the sequence and the model of your test in the form of steps. And for those steps that require input data, or those steps that generate output data from your system, sorry, we generate what we call a data set behind the model of the flow. And as you know, these flows will give us an ability to have a combination of multiple data sets, because we follow a data-driven model for testing, in which we give the flexibility to the users to decide what combinations of data to put in those data sets. So we show a lot of features about how to manage that data, but more importantly, we showed some really exciting features, like, for example, how to do bulk import of data sets, which is a feature we just released in the previous release. I believe it was almost a month ago. We did a bit more in-depth demonstrations on the different data types that we support, like, for example, the simple values that you all know, you can type directly on the screen. How do we add certain logic, like skipping steps directly from the data set? So that's also very interesting in some use cases. How do you do lookups and references, and how do you dynamically generate data with JavaScript functions? So we did a lot of demonstrations around that. And towards the end, we covered the concept of loops, which for those that come from Qualibrate 2.0, this is very similar, comparable to the iterations that we had in the past. And we showed a little bit some examples on how to use the loops to do mass data uploads into the application on the test, for example. So that being said, I think this is a natural step to go into the next topic, which is on managing variables, because we added an additional layer on top of Qualibrate called the variables, which will give you even more power on managing dynamic type of behaviors into your flows and scenarios. So today's session is going to be focused on this topic, and I'm going to split the topic into 3 sections. The first one, I need to explain the difference of the different variable types that we handle in the platform. We have 2 different types of variables. One that we call the system variables, and I'm going to explain what that means. And we have a few options that are only out of the box, are already out of the box available for all the users, which are the system variables and can be utilized in different situations. So I'm going to explain also how to use that. And the second is the user-defined variables, which are more the ones that you decide from a business perspective to use in specific situations. Secondly, I'm going to explain a little bit about the context of the usage of these variables, because we have variables across the board at the level of the flows, at the level of the scenario. And I'm going to explain the difference between those two, because we also recently introduced the concept of a scenario master data, which adds even an additional top layer at the scenario level to manage like scenario variables that can be injected on the underlying flows of that scenario. So there is a bit of a difference, and we're going to explain a little bit about how you can utilize it in different contexts. And in the end, this is probably the bulk of the demonstration today. I want to make it use case based. I want to show you 3 use cases, 3 examples where the variables can be very handy for you. So there is the use case of the end-to-end data exchange, which, for instance, refers to passing data from one flow to another in the context of a scenario. Another use case, which is how can I dynamically populate table line items, whether in SAP or web. I'm going to use an SAP example because I have a template ready for that, so I can show you. So you can literally data drive your tables with the usage of variables and loops, which is a very cool feature. Last but not least, I'm going to show you also how variables can be a very powerful asset for you, especially when you're handling very dynamic behaviors on your application under test. And I'm going to show you an example that we built on a web application, which is pretty cool as well. Okay, so first topic of the day is I'm going to go for a couple of slides just to do a little bit of explanation about the different variable types that we have and the context where these variables are working on. And then I'm going to jump straight into the demonstration. Like I mentioned before, we have 2 different types of variables. The first one is the system variables. And hopefully you can understand these guys, but depending on the asset that you're managing, like for example, if you are working in the context of a data set, some variables are already available, which are what we call reserved variables at the system level that you can use for specific purposes. And one of the examples that I'm going to show today in the context of a data set is the loop index. The reason this is interesting is because the loop index can help you to dynamically connect your loop order with, for instance, indexes in the object properties, or maybe row numbers in the object properties. And these system variables are already available for you to use across the board, whether it's object properties, whether it's probably on the data set. All these variables are ready for you to just copy paste them wherever you want to use them. One example, if you want to use the name of your flow to put into SAP or a web application, you can just in the data set copy this variable, and that will inject the name of the actual flow that you're executing. So the reason we did this, guys, is because this, let's say with a combination of these variables, you can achieve some uniqueness in the data that you're entering into your system under test. And we took an opportunity just to create as many variables as we could that we came to our imagination, so you could use them to dynamically inject data into your system. And again, I'm going to show today a couple of examples, primarily on the loop index, how this can be very useful to do a table line item, let's say, population, because the index can be very useful to decide which row I want to populate, and I can data drive everything with a loop. So that's also very important. One of the things that you will see here as well is that all of these variables will be resolved at the specific context. Like for instance, the dataset name will be resolved only for that specific dataset. But if you change the dataset to a different one, then that name is going to be resolved for that specific dataset. So These are reserved variables for the specific context and assets, which are dataset, flow, task, step, and scenario. If we go to the highest level of the design of Qualibrate, you will touch on the scenario. So you can also use this. For example, let's imagine that you have 10 flows added to a scenario. You can also use the name of the scenario to inject that variable in all those 10 flows. And because you're in the context of that scenario, you're always going to get the same name. So I hope you understand that depending on what you want to do, we have availability of system variables, so you can put that into the system. And I think the best way to explain this is with a demonstration, so we're going to do it shortly. The second type of variables is the user-defined. And the best way to explain this is that whenever you're building your knowledge base of flows and scenarios, you're going to come across the situation where your system generates certain data. Like in SAP, they call it transactional data. But in any other application, this means that your application under test generates certain output. Like, for example, I put an example here of a very simple flow. If you look at a banking application, and one of the and your scenario, your test scenario, is comprised by a flow that creates a customer. Then, as soon as you create a customer, the application generates a customer ID. And in order for you to add a bank account to a customer, you actually need a customer ID before you can actually execute that flow. And the same goes for sending an invoice. Before you can even send an invoice to a customer, your bank account needs to be maintained on the customer master. So from a logical perspective, what that means is that each flow will produce certain output values. Like, for example, the customer flow, the create customer flow, will generate a dynamic value. The application will generate a dynamic output, which you can save in what we call user-defined variables. And the reason it's user-defined is because you decide that it's depending highly on your application logic. So you know how your application works. If your application generates customer numbers or customer IDs, we give you the flexibility to decide how that variable is going to be called. In the end, what we're trying to do is that you want to have the ability to store output values from the application and store them in a variable that can be used in subsequent flows. So the customer ID can be injected in the bank account flow by the usage of the variable. The same goes for the bank account number. Let's imagine that this flow, as soon as you add the bank account, you can also capture the bank account number that has been added, and you can use it as an input for the next flow, which is to send an invoice. And one of the things that it's important to mention is that you can define as many variables as you want, depending on the needs. So I'm going to show an example later today about how to achieve this for an SAP example. So let's jump into the actual demo. Like I mentioned before, I'm going to split the demonstration in 3 parts. I'm going to show 3 different use cases, and I hope those use cases resonate with you. If they don't, we want to open up for questions and probably have the ability to resolve those questions during the interactive demonstration. The first demonstration is that I'm going to do a very small end-to-end scenario. I'm going to put 2 flows in that scenario. And what I'm going to show you is that my first flow generates a quotation. It's going to be an SAP example. This flow will generate a quotation number that can be used for creating a sales order as a reference. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to put these 2 flows together. And you guys are familiar with the recording capability, so that I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I'm really going to focus on how we can export certain output values from the flow and how can we use them in the target data sets. The second use case that I'm going to show you guys, also on SAP, but can be applicable to anything, is how can we use a combination of system variables and loops so we can data drive the population of a data table in SAP, which is a pretty cool feature because you can build a data set with loops, and you can decide how many line items you want to enter into SAP based on the number of loops. And it's a very cool feature that we published since the very beginning of Qualibrate. And last, I'm going to show you also another use case, which is how can we make use of system or let's say user-defined variables to also inject dynamic values into the object properties. This is a bit more advanced, guys. This is very necessary, especially for web applications, because web applications are highly dynamic. So we're going to show you an example on a web shop to do a data-driven selection of a product. So instead of choosing a hard-coded product, I want to data drive it from the data set. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so I'm going to show a demonstration. Let me just share my screen with the system. Please, Marina, let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen. Please proceed.
Great. Okay, first use case, guys, end-to-end data exchange. So the first use case is going to be focused on a scenario. So you can see that I have already a scenario here, which has been prepared. And if I open my scenario, you will notice that I have two flows in here. One is to create a quotation, and the other one is to create a sales order. Now, let's go into the target flow so you see exactly what type of behavior we're having in the target flow, which it's supposed to receive certain values. If I go here to the step number 9, here you will see that as part of my recording, in order for me to create a sales order, there is an input required, which is a quotation number. Now, if I go to my, because I recorded this flow yesterday, and as part of my recording, what I did is that I manually created a quotation, and when I was recording, I used that quotation. I basically typed it myself manually into the system, and then I can now generate, I generated an order based on that quotation. However, if I try to use the same quotation number again, SAP is going to give me a warning because an order has been already connected to that quotation. So if I go to my data sets and I go to my default data set, you have two options. Either you manually generate a quotation and then come to the data set and manually modify the data set value to the new quotation that you generated, which, to be honest, is not a very scalable solution, because that means that every time you want to create a sales order from a quotation, you're going to have to manually execute the quotation flow. You need to copy that value and then come to the target data set and paste it manually, which I think you guys are going to have a lot of headaches by doing that. And the automation concept is not really, it doesn't really make sense. So what we did is that we created a second data set in here, which is called from quotation. And you're going to notice something very interesting in here. Very important to know, guys, is that for the variables, we have a convention in order to read the variables from either system variables or user-defined variables. As I showed you before, you can see here that this looks like a user-defined variable, right? And the way to access the variable is to type $sign and then curly brackets, and then you put the variable name, which I'm going to show you where it comes from in a bit. And then you close it with a curly bracket again. So basically what this is doing is that my create sales order process, it's going to execute all the steps. And when it reaches the step number 9, which is to type a value of the quotation, the first thing that it's going to do, my engine is going to look up for the value that is contained within this variable. So you might already be scratching your head and saying like, okay, where is this value coming from? Because where do you define it? So for that, I'm going to go into my source flow, which is the create quotation flow. So I show you the flow that actually receives the value, the variable, but we need to have a way in the source flow to produce that variable. So I'm going to open my flow itself in here, the create quotation. And this process, what it does is that it goes through SAP, it types some master data, it fills up the header of the quotation. Then we enter some line items, which please remember this, because this is going to be part of my second demonstration, my second use case. What we basically do is that we type a material. I can open more details about this. I type a material, then I type the order quantity, I press enter, and then I basically go and I save my quotation. And at the last step, what I do is that, as you guys know, SAP produces a quotation number as part of my last step. So what I did in my recording is that I manually added an store step, which meant that I want to take a look at my status bar in SAP, and I want to store the quotation number that is generated from the application. So I I think you guys are familiar with the recording of store steps. Basically, you click the record step, you focus on the control that is giving you the value that you're willing to store. You select it, and then the recording will capture that value and will store it in the dataset. Now, very important to know is that the store alone is not going to generate a variable, because that basically stores the value of the application only in the context of this flow. So you can use it in the context of this flow in the datasets within the flow. However, if I want to export this variable so I can use it in other flows, we have a setting here, which is, and let me show you another step which doesn't have the setting enabled, because all the steps by default have the export data as variable setting off. But what I did is that for this specific store where I'm storing the quotation number, what I did is that I activated the export data as variable, and then I define, this is where we go into the user defined variables, because I can also decide to do quote number in here. And the reason is user defined is because you decide how the variable is going to be named. And of course, you need to keep as close of a naming convention in your team so they all work in the same way. And what is important in here is that you need to make the variable as, would say, self-explanatory as possible. So I'm just going to leave the previous value because that's the one that we're using in target. So just to do a bit of a recap, here on the store step is where we define the exporting of the value of whatever you're storing in that variable. So that will create a variable and we'll put the value in that variable. And then on the target flow, which is the create sales order, in order to access that variable, you need to just copy paste this value, copy this value, go to your target flow. And the only change that you have to do in the data set, because that's where you put the values that you want to enter into the system, you paste the value of that variable, but make sure that you use the $ and curly brackets, because that's our convention to be able to access those variables. Okay, so I think we have some questions, guys, in here. Let me see. Alan, can you also show how data store option looks like and how can you use it in the other transaction and flow? And by the way, the same person said, oh, well, never mind. I think I already resolved that question, which is, let me just select this. We basically go to the source flow, we activate the export data as variable, we define a name for that variable, and you save that configuration. And every time this step executes, it will basically put the new value dynamically into that variable every time it executes. And the way to access that variable is that you go to the target data set and you will, with the convention of the $ curly brackets, you will put the variable inside of that specific, let's say, data parameter. So now to show you a bit of an example of an execution I did yesterday. So basically, I went and executed this flow, which generated, you can see that here we have a view of the source flow, which creates a quotation, and then the second flow, which creates a sales order based on the quotation. If I expand the task, the last task, which is to save the quote, and then the last step, which is to save the store the value in a variable, the value that was generated from the system, it's 2011.37. And if I go to the target flow and I go to type value in quotation, you can see that the variable was resolved and 2011.37 was the actual value that was entered in the system. So instead of you having to manually modify the value in the target system all the time, we introduce the variable so you can automate that process. So your regression test scripts, if they are automated, they can be self-sustainable and they can you can reach that level of unattendance in your automated testing process. So before I jump to the next topic, I would like to see if anyone wants to raise their hand, if anyone is curious about specific things, and we can answer the question live and we can give you the microphone. Any questions so far? Okay, that means that I'm a good teacher and I've explained very clearly. But if you don't have any questions, I can jump into the next topic. Okay. So the next topic is going to be related to a very interesting use case, which I personally like a lot, and it's called what we call the using loops and system variables to add some repetition when you're filling up certain tables. And I'm going to use an SAP example for that. And I showed you earlier that we have a structure here on our flow. By the way, I think there's one question here. Oh, I'm very glad to hear. So one of our users is saying that it's not a question, but I think he's just confirming that the variables are working for them. So I'm very happy to hear that. So thanks for that. It's good to know. So coming back into the topic, the use case that I want to show now is we have some situations, and this is applicable for web applications as well, where you need to find a way to easily data drive the population of data tables. In SAP, we have two different types of tables. For the people that do not know SAP too well, it's not really relevant, but for the people that are working with SAP, SAP offers grids and table controls. And we always have the question from customers, how can I data drive with the data set? How can I decide how many times I want to enter materials or different line items into my table? So what we did is that in order to do that, as you guys remember, we have the concept of loops and we have the concept of repetition at the task level. So we can introduce loop at the task level. So instead of you having to record every single row, what we do is that we record only let's say the column that you want to maintain. In this case is the material and also the quantity. So just to keep it simple, I'm only maintaining two columns, which is the material and quantity. And in some way, I need to find a way to decide, okay, maybe I want to run 2 materials for this instead of only 1. Or maybe I want to create 10 materials or 10 line items for this specific use case. So let me take you first to the loops themselves, because that's where it gets interesting. First of all, I'm going to open my default dataset and I'm going to go to my line items task. And here you can see that I'm only entering material FG226 with a quantity 5. But if I wanted an easy way to reproduce this with multiple line items, I'm going to open my multiple line items task, that dataset. And here I'm already entering 3 materials with different combinations of quantities. And if I want, I can also create a new row, maybe with a different material, a 5,000, and maybe I want 40 of this type of materials, right? So this is the first step you have to do, because now we have the ability to data drive with loops the population of different materials and different line items in order to do that. Now, where it gets a little bit more interesting, I'm going to show you the second part, which is because at the moment, when we did the recording, SAP recorded only the first row. So how can we tell the identification engine that you need to execute on different rows? So we're going to take a look at that. I'm going to show you something really cool, guys, that we're very excited about, which is a combination of system variables, right, together with object properties. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to my step and I'm going to open the first, let's say, column. And then I'm going to go to object properties. And by the way, guys, if you have some questions about this and this is a bit too technical, please let me know so we can do a bit more of an explanation on it. But here, one of the things that you will see is that I need to look for a way to tell the engine that I want to enter the, let's say, the details on a specific row. Specifically on SAP, the ID of the control actually at the very end has something, and let me just remove this for now because it's already maintained. When it was recorded, sorry for that, when the flow was recorded, the ID of the element was actually like this. And one of the things that SAP provides on table controls is that they provide the index of the row and the column that you are actually trying to work on. The first element inside the brackets is the actual column number, but it's not really relevant for now. But what is relevant for us is the second part of the let's say of this specific identification attribute, which is the actual row number, right? So by default, while we recorded it, it's hard coded to 0 because we recorded the first row, and the first row is always considered 0. That's the index of the row. But if we wanted to use a dynamic handler for deciding which row to enter, the best thing you can do is to use the system variables, right? And in the Help Center, I already showed you in the presentation, but in the Help Center, we have an article, which is called variables. And here is where you have access to all these different system variables that potentially you can use. And look at this one. This is very interesting because we have a system variable that is called loop index. And if you think about it, you are data driving the different line items with the loop index. So, and this one, it starts at 0. So you could argue that this is a very useful variable to use straight here into the index that we're actually trying to manipulate. So now, if I go a little bit to the end of this specific, yes, correct. Oh, sorry. So here you can see that now it's gonna go to the row, which is gonna be driven depending on the index of the loop. So it will dynamically find the row. If I'm executing index 5, that means that it's gonna go to the row number 5. So it's a pretty nice solution, guys. So you can achieve that data-driven type of thing. And this shows you the power of the system variables as well, because those are already part of the system. And you can just focus in the end to decide how many loops you want to add as part of the line items population. So in this case, we're going to enter 4 different, let's say, quotations, right? I think we have some questions, guys, in here. Yeah, that's a good point. My machine is 2 hours behind, yeah, because this machine is somewhere else. So, but yeah, it's a live demonstration. So, another question: can this be used for drop-down menus where you have more options to select? Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the use case. And actually, I'm going to show an example of a web application to do a dynamic selection of a product based on a user variable, for example. So good question. So this is applicable actually for any control. You need to find the property of the control that will help you to make the use of those variables, right? So just to do a bit of a recap, what we did here is that in the ID of this specific control, I found a way to decide which row to select, and I make use of a system variable to be able to dynamically drive the population of that. And what I'm going to show you guys is I'm going to run it very quickly, so you see live how this is going to work. And I'm going to run this automatically, and I'm going to run, of course, the multiple line items. And what this is going to do, it's basically just go through the system, and whenever we reach the quotation part, I'm hoping that the row is going to be populated accordingly, according to the combination that I did. So here's the first line item, then the second line item. And because I'm data driving the identification of the row, it's paying attention to that. Of course, this material does not exist. So I'm just going to stop the execution. So this material actually doesn't exist in the system. But I think you guys get the point. This is how we can achieve that level of, I would say, dynamic behavior to maintain data tables on SAP. And I believe we have some other examples that we can share with you on a web application as well. So I would like to open again for more questions in case you guys have more questions. I think we have some. Or no, we have answered all of them. Maybe someone wants to raise their hand so we can give you the, let's say, the microphone and you can ask live, or maybe get some feedback. What do you guys think about this feature? Is anyone raising their hands? I don't think so. Okay.
So far not. So we can proceed and then leave it for next last 20 minutes,
Okay.
which is actually now.
Yeah, so the next part is I'm going to cover it briefly. So I covered, just a recap, I covered 2 points right now for the usage of variables. The first one is related to how to pass data between flows in the context of an scenario. So you can use user-defined variables. The second use case is how can we make a use of system variables and loops to be able to introduce that sort of repetition. A very useful use case is the data tables, can be in SAP or web. And now I'm going to show the third use case, which can be very handy for web applications as well, and potentially to answer the question that I got in that one of our users posted with regards to dropdowns. I'm going to show an example on dynamic object attributes on web. So first of all, I'm going to show you here a flow that we recorded in one of our web applications, which is a web shop. So what this flow does is that it goes to a web shop and then it searches for a product. And then we basically filter by certain criteria. And then we click on a product, right? Now, when you click on a product, you also do, what we do as part of a test is that as soon as the product page is open, we do a verification of the value of that product, of the price of that product. So maybe that's some pricing test case that you have to do as part of your testing process. Then we add that product to the cart. And when we add it to the cart, what we also do is that we validate that the correct product was added into the cart. So you might already be thinking where we're going with this. But one of the things that, that we have as part of the recording is that the recorder will capture and hardcode all the specific attributes of the product that you selected as part of your recording. So for example, here, if I go to the screenshot in here, you can see that, give me 1 second, it's in here. You can see that in this web shop, we actually have 2 products, but the recording was done on the AirPods Pro. So if you open the step for AirPods Pro, even the step name has been hard-coded to select only this product. So if someone asks you a question, can we use this same flow to select any product we want? The answer is yes, it's possible, but we have to do a few tweaks in order to do that. We have to data drive it. So first of all, I need to go here to my object properties, and here you can see that the object identification attributes for this specific product are hard-coded into the attributes. So this flow will only work if I want to test on the AirPods Pro. But if I were to test with any type of product, I would suggest that we have the ability to also data drive it with the dataset. And to explain how that works, we can make the use of system variables. So first of all, we have a system variable called parameter value, which what it does is that it helps me to access the value of the parameter that exists in the dataset for that specific step. So what I can do is that I can go to the dataset itself, go to my default, and then I'm going to go to the add product task. And then here you can see that there is a click on AirPods Pro. As you can see, this dataset value is not maintained at all, right? So here what we have to do is AirPods Pro. But this is not going to do all the job, because if you think about it, the object property, it's still using a hard-coded value, which is this. What we can do instead is that we can make the use of system variables to be able to access the parameter value. And what this is basically going to do is that it's going to dynamically inject whatever value you have defined in the dataset, right? So with a couple of changes, this step can be data-driven now, because we maintain the value of the product that we want to select, and we also we connected the attributes of the property dynamically to the value of the dataset. So I hope that's very clear for you guys. If not, please raise a question, because this is a very important concept. So now that we make this step a bit more generic, so instead of only selecting AirPods Pro, I can select any product. What we can also do is that we can also change the description of the step. So we can do click on product as opposed to AirPods Pro. So this step can be data-driven now. So what I'm going to do now, guys, is that I'm going to run this process so we make sure that all the additions that we did are working. So I'm going to run the default dataset. And then you will see that it's going to launch the web page. It's going to go to the products. It's going to do the filtering. Now it's selecting the AirPods Pro. And it's doing a verification into the process and goes to the cart and basically verify that the AirPods Pro were added, right? So this is where it gets more interesting, because now that I did my additions to make this step more data-driven, right? I'm going to add a new data set to actually buy. So let me go to the shop.qualibrate.io. And what I'm going to do is that I want to select this product instead. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a data set, which is the LG display. And in my product, instead of AirPods Pro, I need to first filter with the Mac, change the value of this product. And of course, the expected value is going to be different. So I need to modify that as well. Otherwise, it's going to fail. And then save it. And because I already did the configuration in my properties and connecting the data set with the product itself. And by the way, very important, this has also been hard-coded with the AirPods Pro, so I can also change the value to verify price or product price. So it's more generic. Now this flow is fully data-driven. I can add any product, or let's say, or modify any type of price. And very important as well, by the way, is that you need to modify the expected value here as well. And you have two options. Either you maintain it like this, or last session we did a reference to previous steps. You can also do that, right? So it's up to you. So now what we're going to do is that I'm going to execute this process now with the new data set. So you see now how this process is data driven. So the automated tester will go to the shop, will go to these products, will filter accordingly, select this specific product, validate the price, and then I also go to the cart and I do the validation of the product that I just started. And it just required a couple of adjustments on my side to make sure that the identification of that product was data-driven fully. So if I go back to my logs, you can see that now my data set is LG displayed. I went to click on product, and you can see that the data that was input into my data set is the product that I selected. And my object is data-driven as well. So it selected the right object. Very important to know, guys, because some of you have been trained on concepts like expats and selectors, is that these variables, sorry, I think it's here. These variables can also be used within the expats and the selectors, which is a very powerful feature, I believe. So you can inject it anywhere. Very important as well is that you can also introduce user-defined or system variables within the object properties. So the level of dynamic behavior can be handled with almost any case. So we're pretty confident that all of your challenges can be solved with this. So this is the third use case, guys. Do you have any specific questions? Do you want to raise your hand about what I just shown on the three use cases? The end-to-end data exchange, driving data set, data tables in SAP with a combination of loops and system variables. And last but not least, my favorite feature, how to dynamically inject values or variables into object identification properties. Any questions about that, or we can go straight into the Q&A session? Okay, I don't think there's any questions, guys, which that means that you are about to roll these all these new learnings into your systems, and we don't expect any questions. This is just a joke. But look, guys, we're really looking forward for you to make use of these features to the best of your ability. Of course, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. But yeah, now I think we're going to move into an open Q&A session, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Yeah, looks like you explained everything very clear. So all questions have been answered. For now, we don't have more questions.
Yeah, maybe this is more generic questions, right? If you guys have any other questions related to the product or any other features that you might be interested on, etc. Okay. Oh, I was expecting a bit more questions this time. Last sessions we got several questions, right? And this one I was expecting a bit to be more technical, but it seems that it's working fine.
I think maybe people also need to process these use cases you mentioned, because yeah, that's I believe might be sometimes complicated.
Yeah. All right. If there are no further questions, guys, I would like to close the session, and more importantly, I would like to thank you all for your attendance. And as you guys know, there's going to be a recording out of this session shared with you guys, so you can always come back and check how we did the demonstration for the specific use cases. As a next step, we are planning the next sessions, the session 4, which is end-to-end scenarios and master data, which is another concept that we introduced. And then soon, towards the end of the series, we're going to be talking about best practices on organizing your content in order to create some intelligence on your reporting. Maybe you want to track progress on specific things like test preparation or test execution. So we're going to do some demonstrations on the dashboards, especially based on whatever you have in your project. And hopefully we can get you guys producing your own dashboards as well. So thank you very much for your time, guys. This is at least for me. Maybe Marina, you want to close the session as well?
Yes, thanks, Alan. Thank you, everyone. Alan just mentioned the next topics for the sessions, but of course we are very open for any suggestions from your side. If you have any interesting topics you would like to have a dedicated session for, please come back with the feedback. We are very open for that. We actually got feedback from some users that they have some issues joining the sessions via Zoom. So just information for you that we made a decision to move start from next session to another solution. You will receive the update regarding this within the next few days. And also I want to mention that the next session we are planning in 2 weeks from now, but this notification will follow as well. So thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you, Alan, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.